Good evening. My name is Olivia, and I'm an event manager here at Town Hall. And on behalf of the staff at Town Hall and our presenting partner, Gage Academy of Art, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our presentation with Rose Frantzen and Gary Faigin. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We are so glad to have you join us tonight. The presentation will run about 60 minutes, including Q&A. To submit your questions for the Q&A portion of the event, please enter meet.ps/Frantzen or scan the QR code right now on the screen with your smartphone. We'll drop this link in the chat and remind folks where to go when we get to Q&A. We can't guarantee that we'll be able to address every question, but we will try to get to as many as possible. You can help us by keeping our own your question concise and in the form of a question. For those who would like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of your video player. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming events include the Bushwick Book Club Seattle with an evening of music inspired by Michelle Zauner's New York Times bestseller, Crying in H Mart. Also be sure to tune in to our next episode of Town Hall's In the Moment podcast featuring Lucy Antek Johnson in discussion with our artist in residence, Gretchen Yanover, about the famed Italian composer, Arturo Toscanini. We also have Gretchen Yanover's upcoming Findings Night to round out her residency here with us, which will be really a beautiful program. Visit our website to join our email list and get the latest updates as more programs are added throughout the season. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. As part of our Arts and Culture series, this event is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, City of Seattle Arts and Culture, and Washington State Arts Commission. Town Hall is also a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members who are joining us. If you share in Town Hall's goal of a community energized and empowered by considering questions of politics, science, and culture, please consider supporting us by becoming a member. You'll find membership information on our website. And now to this evening, I am going to turn it over to painter, critic, and author Gary Faigin, who is the co-founder and artistic director of Gage Academy of Art in Seattle, as well as the school's still life atelier instructor. Faigin also serves as lecturer in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, where he teaches facial expressions to graduate animation students and works on a research team studying the human perception of stylized facial expressions. In 2001, Faigin published his first book, The Artist's Complete Guide to Facial Expression, which has since been translated into 7 languages and reprinted 16 times. Please welcome me in joining Gary Faigin and Rose Frantzen.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for that kind introduction. And thanks to Town Hall for partnering with us. We are two organizations with super compatible goals. We both try to enrich the cultural life of Seattle in our own ways, and this partnership has been really fun and really productive for both organizations. We have 2 more of these partner events coming up this year. Next month, I'm interviewing Faye Jones, who is going to be familiar to a lot of you as a mainstay of the Seattle art community for many years. And then in May, I'm interviewing a sculptor from Pakistan named Humaira Abid. And so you can find information about both of those on the Gage website as well as on the Town Hall website. Anyway, I'm super delighted to be here tonight with Rose Frantzen, and this is a real twofer. In other words, we brought Rose here to do a workshop in portrait painting at Gage, because, that's our specialty, is teaching these artistic skills. And while she was here, I thought it would be really cool to interview her about her amazing work at Town Hall, and Town Hall said, great. And so, I don't really have to do much of an introduction to Rose because her work really speaks for itself. But there are artists, and then there are artists who are forces of nature. And Rose falls into the second category. Having just had dinner with her, I'm blown away by her energy and her positive spirit. And I told her that after having, previewed her work before tonight, I already felt I knew her through her paintings. I mean, her spirit and her humanity and her love for people comes through so strongly in her work. And, you know, the most famous thing that she's done is portrait of Maquoketa, which we're going to be talking. Did I get it right? That's my hardest thing, is pronouncing the name of that town. Anyway, I mean, we'll be talking about that. But the quickie summary is that artist moves from the small town in Iowa. All of her siblings leave and never come back. Population 6,000, you can imagine. And then Rose decides she wants to do this amazing project. She's living in New York. She's already gone to art school. She studied with some amazing people, including Richard Schmidt, who some of you are going to be familiar with. And you can see his influence in her work in terms of painterly realism. And she decides she wants to go back and paint this small town, and she's never left. So her and her husband, Chuck, live in City Hall. Used to be, they bought it as a studio, and she's been there ever since. And she says, I'm working all the time. There's nothing else to do in a town of 6,000 people in the middle of Iowa. So it's a great place to be an artist because there are no distractions. Right. But anyway, she gets a lot done, as you're going to see. So anyway, without any further ado, Rose, I'm so happy to be here with you, and we're going to go through a quickie overview of a whole bunch of her work, and then we're going to dial back, and we're going to just look at a couple of pieces and go deeper as sort of part two.
So thank you, Gary, for having me here. It's been really fun being in Seattle, and I've really enjoyed Gage so far. It's a wonderful experience to be in that school, and it feels really inspiring. And I love being in artist environments, so dynamite. Thanks for providing that for this community. I mean, they're really fortunate. But anyway, I guess what we're going to do is we're going to just sort of look at a bunch of my work, and we're going to go pretty quickly through it. And maybe we can just begin to start. And what I am is I'm an alla prima painter. That means I try to paint something, a portrait or anything in pretty much one setting. And so he's just going to run through some of my more, I would say these are portraits that are possibly painted somewhere in like the last 4 to 5 years. Just a few quick paintings. And each one of these people have actually posed for me for these paintings, and these paintings are done from life, looking at that person in the moment. And maybe most of them are done within 4 to 7 hours for all of these paintings. And but where I came, and Gary sort of slightly mentioned, is I came from, I grew up in a small town called Maquoketa, but I moved to art school and I moved to Chicago. And this was one of the last paintings I did before I wound up finding myself accidentally almost moving back to Iowa after living in Chicago. And these 4 kids lived in my neighborhood, and they lived across the street, and I paint them hanging out in the alley across the street. And keep going. And this is one of the last paintings. We'll talk about this maybe a little bit later because it fits with the new series. It's like one of my first, I did this painting in 1989. I think I'm probably 23, 24 years old. And so keep going. And when I moved back to Iowa, and even though I was doing a lot of figurative stuff out in Chicago and stuff, the first way I sort of found my way back into painting was actually doing a lot of landscapes. And you'll see some paintings where I'm painting maybe out in Boston or in New York, or you see there's different places. But I became a bit of a landscape painter. I don't know if you do that, Gary. Where you just do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I love plein air painting.
It's plein air painting because alla prima is kind of that idea. And what's interesting about painting landscapes like that is you really learn to paint color, right? And you learn to actually paint fast. And so, but anyway, the other thing that I did when I moved back to my small town was I actually cried for 10 months when I first moved back because I couldn't believe I was back in this town that when I was younger, I couldn't get out of fast enough. And I'm trying to find my way in after having access to models on a regular basis. And one of the first places I found was that was a painting of a farmer. I was watching TV at my parents' house, and there was some guys buying and selling cattle. And when they were doing that, I said to my dad, it was like someplace in Texas. I'm like, Dad, do we do that here? Because it's a farming community. And my dad said, oh yeah, we have 2 of those cattle sales barns. And I went to that sales barn and sat in the risers, and I have a little pochette box, And I painted 225 paintings of these guys sitting in risers. Unfortunately, this was so early on in my career, I don't have a lot of photographs of the ones that I did, but I would paint these guys as they sat there. And that kind of it's like did this, a lot of direct painting. Go ahead. And the other person, I found this woman who came to a little demo talk that I did, and her name was Ethel, and she became my first official model in Iowa, and she was like 68 years old, and she became my best friend. And I moved back, and I'm like 25 years old, and so I did probably about 15 paintings of Ethel. So I'm painting the farmers, I'm painting Ethel, and then I learned that there was this thing called country line dancing. Do you ever hear that?
I've done it
You've done
in New
it.
Hampshire.
So they had country line dancing in this old gym in this little town that was even smaller than my town, about 10 miles away, on every Friday night. And I'm single, and I started painting these paintings of people country line dancing. And later, I think you'll say how it's similar to Zorn, right?
Yeah.
Definitely inspired by Zorn. And same with the farmers in the sales barn was inspired by Zorn. And I started doing those little paintings, and I was lighting my paintings only by the light of the men's bathroom. It was the only way I painted those paintings. And then I did a bunch of large, and this painting's probably 40 by 60 or 50 by 62 or something like that, maybe 50 by 64, sort of large-scale portraits or paintings of people in situ in my studio or out on location. This is another life-size painting of this woman. These are like my early sort of figurative. So this is George, and all of these people are posing completely from life, and I'm doing these. The cows didn't hold still, but when they passed through, I paint them. That's all done out there on location, you know. And this is my youngest brother posing for me. All of my siblings, whenever they come home, they get inducted as models in these earlier years. And I also started doing not just sort of naturalism, where what you just saw, a bunch of things where you look at the scene and you paint it as it is. I started to embrace this kind of idea of allegorical, trying to find some sort of other narrative inside of, still using representational elements. So we'll just pass through a series of sort of allegorical experiments. And I don't know, it was like trying to do this, I want to pause there for a second. I'm trying to do this as a alla prima painter, or like as a direct painter where you make all the decisions and everybody's posing from life. And I was doing this, I had this opening, and this guy came in and saw my paintings, and he saw like I'd done this pretty complicated, we don't have it here in this video, did this pretty complicated painting of, it was four, I don't know how you call it, not two diptychs put together as a four quadric.
There's diptychs and
triptychs,
and I don't think there's one for four, quadriptychs.
Quadriptychs, whatever way. But anyway, I did this quadriptych, and this guy who had studied from some other school had moved to the area like 30 miles away from me, and he came in and he said, hey, you know, that's an interesting idea, but do you ever think about trying a different approach to these ideas? Because I was doing everything from life and trying to do that, looking at it with this sort of alla prima set technique, and he said, why don't you try this old master's technique? So I was still living in New York at the time. He wound up like in a couple of phone calls telling me how you do this glazing method where you draw it out and then you do layers, like the way Da Vinci painted and stuff like that. So I did a whole series of those paintings. There's the first one, next one, this was one of them, there is the second one. And then the third one is this one. So it's like done on panel, and then with, but this is also stained glass. It's like multimedia.
We're going to go back and talk more about this
bit.
one, yeah, in part two.
Right. So I'm doing a bunch of paintings like this, and I've really moved away from that alla prima direct painting. Like I used to do a portrait in maybe 9 hours, and now it's taking me 2 months or 8 months, or like a month and a half to do a head. And so I was kind of wondering if I could ever learn how to paint alla prima again. And I was visiting a friend in Arizona, and I wanted to give her a wedding present, and I painted her son on a 12 by 12 inch canvas, and I did this quick portrait. And he's 16 years old, and he posed for me in their garage. And he really liked the painting. I did this really quick painting, and he really liked it. And her husband was the curator at the Phoenix Museum of Art, but he was more a contemporary curator. And I had done a bunch of other paintings. He didn't really pay much attention to that, but he saw this painting I did of her son, and And he's like, hey, what's that? And this woman was her cousin who came in. I know this is sounding like crazy, sort of. But she came in and she said, hey, would you paint me? And so I painted her another 4-hour session. So I did these 2 4-hour paintings, first sort of alla prima paintings I'd done in a while. And this curator sort of said, hey, those are kind of interesting paintings. And I hadn't really ever paid attention to that type of work as anything interesting, but I just put that in my head as a little idea. Go ahead. So now I'm back in Maquoketa. This was just a little trip to Arizona. I'm back in Maquoketa, and I'm really aching to learn how to paint more alla prima paintings again. And I'm also been asked to do a show in this town about 30 miles away. It's a museum show, and the idea was social commentary. The show was about social commentary. And I was trying to think of some sort of idea to make some sort of commentary. And I'm walking to the grocery store, and like I got this idea, oh, I want to paint alla prima paintings again, and I'm trying to figure out how to do a whole show about social commentary, and I have all these ideas, and I'm in the grocery store, and I'm like, I should democratize the portrait, right? I should paint anybody and everybody in my town. And and I will do it alla prima, and I'll do it in these 4-hour sessions, and that was the genesis of Portrait of Maquoketa. So these are all these paintings that become Portrait of Maquoketa. And when I got this idea, the thought was that I would paint as many paintings I could possibly paint in my life, which would be, I was like, maybe I'll do 700 paintings of my town of 6,000. And I had, anyway, maybe that's a long story. But I had somebody, my brother told me, do you realize how long it would take you to paint 700 portraits? And he said it would take me 2 or 3 years if I did 1 or 2 a day. So I quickly decided to see how many paintings I could paint in a year. And so the project kind of got the parameters of painting how many portraits I could do in a year. So are you following me with this whole narrative? And
yeah.
So each of these people, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Well, no, I was just going to say that, I mean, obviously these are totally remarkable paintings, but one of the dirty little secrets about portrait painting in America, which is pretty decadent for the most part, is that most portrait artists work from photographs.
Right.
And some of them even project. So Rose is completely remarkable in working from life like this, and working so quickly and so gorgeously.
So each of these people signed themselves up, and that was sort of part of that project where they would sign themselves up and be on my calendar, and I didn't know who I was going to get. I would just know that there were so I would have I just arranged the sign up according to decade. So I didn't know, so I would know they might be between 0 and 10 years old, or 0 or 50 and 40 and 50, or 50 and 60. And I would come in and I would see whoever showed up would be who I'd be painting that day. And so I did 180 paintings in a year, and this became the Portrait of Maquoketa project. We're talking about it really fast, but we could go on longer if you want.
Well, we can also feel how comfortable she made these people, because there's a real warmth to these portraits. And obviously, you know, Rose interacted with them in a way that brought out their best attributes, it seems to me.
Well, I tried to, so while I'm painting these portraits, all of these 180 people are watching me paint the painting in a mirror right behind me, right? And so I was really kind of interested in having them, since they're watching that painting happen, I was also interested in sort of having, like, finding them in an expression that they felt like they most comfortable with. Does that make sense? So sometimes I did sort of slightly bypass an expression, since you're the expression king, right? That might have been a little bit more, not one that they would be happy to see. I would find a way to find questions, or sort of have the conversation sort of move toward something that they felt a little more lively. Like, he doesn't look very lively, but you see he's kind of lively in his eyes, right, Gary?
No, I think these people look, I mean, I get a warmth and a sense of of a real interactive presence from all of these portraits.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's because of the studio environment that you created.
Yeah. So in this project, I painted people from 4 days old to 99 3/4. And I tried to do 10 people of each gender for, in this project, 10 people in each decade. So I had 10 men, 10 women from each of those, in each of that decade period. So it wound up sort of stopping at like 180 with that in a year. You can kind of see what this is sort of saying. But then when I got the idea to do this, I didn't know that it would take off or anything else would happen to it. I was just really interested in trying to find a way to sort of, how does an artist sort of engage with their community? I had some sort of personal aims, like learning to do alla prima again, and I had some sort of aims of trying to democratize the portrait, but I also had this aim for an artist to contribute to their community. Like, how do you do something for your community to help it see itself? Was one of the questions that also inspired this project. And what I found was I couldn't really teach them all to paint, but if I could bring them and have them sit in front of me, they might have the experience of feeling seen, and they might have the experience of actually being part of the creative process if they saw it in the mirror from the beginning of a white canvas to the end. And they would feel like, a lot of times when I paint a model, it feels like we're co-creating the painting together. And my models always sort of derive some sort of, I don't know, some sort of fulfillment from that experience. And so I felt like if I could bring that to my community, that might be some way for an artist to sort of share their thing with the community. But so now I got all these portraits, and the Smithsonian showed them as the portraits. But all along, while I was painting the paintings, I had some young men come from the high school, came in, some guys from the high school, and they're asking me, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with these, with all these portraits? And I'm like, they're just like, you should do something. And I was like, oh, I will hang them with this landscape. It's sort of, this idea came to me because I think I was trying to impress some 16 and 17-year-old guys, right? I'm making a joke, Gary, you're not laughing, I'm sorry. Sorry. But anyway, I did this sort of landscape. So the whole idea was to sort of put the portraits on one side and have this landscape on the other, and that becomes this installation. And maybe you're starting to see how this one came about. Maybe we can talk about that a little more clearly in a few minutes, you know?
Yeah, we're going to go back and talk about the installation in part 2.
Yeah, in part 2, just a little bit. So Portrait Maquoketa comes, and these are just pictures of me working on that in my studio. I'm having some trouble with sort of some of the color choices from in the studio, so I took the painting out on location again and modified the colors and stuff, and then wound up doing this entire painting. And this is like the entire view of this, and it's 34 independent panels put together to create one painting. And in this, so when you're sitting in one place in a chair, all of these panels, and only from that one spot do all these panels become one big composition.
Anamorphosis.
And yeah, and anamorphosis. Now, I hadn't really heard of that idea, but that's another longer story. You guys will have to ask me that story sometime. A lot of times I tell that when I'm painting a portrait commission or somebody. But anyway, we're bouncing just a bit ahead. Anyway, so when you sit in this chair, all these paintings become one, and part of that idea came because Chuck helped me. But when I painted all these people in my town, I didn't have a choice about who would pose. Right? So a lot of times when you hire models, you choose people that you have a personal sort of relationship or affection for, or visual affection for, or you're sort of inspired by their face, right? But when I painted Portrait Maquoketa, I had to paint whoever showed up. And sometimes I would be painting somebody who I probably would never want to paint if I was choosing them on the street. Does that make sense? And so I had to find a way to see that person and get inspired in that moment, right? And what I found out is that this sort of bias that I have, this sort of prejudice to who I would want to paint, wasn't a real thing, okay? Because sitting in front of anybody who had to pose, everybody became somebody who wanted to paint if I sat a little bit quieter and looked at them a little longer.
Rose, you know, I tell people in my portrait classes, I say, there are boring people, but there are no boring faces.
That's right. Absolutely. But you know, you have that, you think there couldn't, you come with these prejudices and these biases and stuff. So you think that you're going to have some sort of boring people are boring to paint, but absolutely true. And it became my job to kind of find a way to be inspired in them. And a lot of times, I don't know about this for you, Gary, but for me, it's like the nose. I can always anchor myself into the joy of painting anybody because I love painting their noses. Do you have that?
No.
What moves
Eyes,
you?
eyes.
Eyes.
I'm an eye man.
Yeah, you know, but so like if I'm just looking at somebody really quick, you know, it's like the nose is like the sort of like an easy sort of anchor. And so here's what I like to say when I'm teaching my students, and I have this sort of like ick, like, oh, I don't really want to paint that. I don't really want to paint that. If I get just a little bit quieter and just a little bit quieter, I'll have a little voice that'll say in my head, oh, I can't wait to paint that. And sometimes it's just like the nose, or maybe it's just like the little bit of the crinkle of the ridge of like a crow's feet or something like that. Oh, I can't wait to paint that. And I learned to just follow that voice. And the reason why I'm talking about that in this moment is that I had all of these same sort of biases and prejudices when I looked at any subject. And I started to look at my town in a new way and started painting things about my town, like the ugly greenhouse with the fake siding and the this and the that. Now you can start going. I started to say that maybe I don't know what I want to paint. Maybe I should just sort of try to paint anything, so paint the truck, the garbage can. Like I think I had some sort of formulated ideas of what was a good painting. And Portrait Maquoketa just kind of broke my biases and my prejudices in that way. And so I started painting just any sort of scene that looked a little like, hey, just paint it. So am I making sense? Like I'm sort of throwing off the shackles of my prejudices in that project. That project just sort of opened my eyes up in a new way.
Well, it's because, you know, I mean, if we were in that shop, we wouldn't think it was paintable. But the way you paint it is what turns it into art.
Fair enough. But I usually find, I don't know about you, Gary, but I find that light becomes the thing that I can paint. Like in that shop, having that light come, the blue and hitting all that stuff, all of a sudden becomes really interesting to me. And I don't necessarily so much care about even the objects, right? This one, you reading it? 1 tequila, 2
I know, 3 tequila, floor.
Right? I put that. He was wearing that T-shirt when I met him, and I put him on it anyway. And this I did while our book is being printed. This was the press room that was printing the book. Like this was printing in the local newspaper, and our book was being printed in a room right next to this. And while the book is being printed, I just set up an easel and started painting this guy repairing press parts.
And Rose, do you know the Menzel?
What?
Do you know there's a Menzel painting of a foundry that this is very reminiscent
No,
of?
I don't know that painting.
Okay.
Menzel?
Yeah, Menzel was the Degas of Germany.
No, I don't know this, Gary.
He was, I mean, like you, he was a genius draftsman. And he did a major painting, the inside of a foundry, that when you look at it, you'll see why I mentioned it.
Well, you know, when you're a naturalist, of course, when you're painting the scene in situ, there's all those greats people always painted it before you, right? But I always tell, it's like really interesting to have that experience myself, you know, especially when you're a director, an alla prima painter. But anyway, so now we're sort of looking at, this is what we called the Maquoketa series, and I just started doing people in town with some of the environment around it. It's like a sort of a large, these are all large paintings, and every person in this entire part is life size. And so what Chuck is what we're showing you now is Portrait Maquoketa kind of took off, and then the Iowa State University is having me do a similar project where I'm painting the faces of Iowa State, and at this point I've painted 48 people. But I did my first 20 at the Iowa State Fair, which maybe you've heard of.
Oh, and with thousands of spectators
That's right.
streaming by.
That's
it's
right.
a typical state fair.
And it was like 97 degrees in that space. And so here's like just like some of them. There's 48 now.
And that is the same state fair, by the way. We're not going to get into politics.
Yes.
Where every goddamn presidential candidate for the last how many years has gone and
That's
had
right.
the deep fried
That's right. That's right.
popcorn or whatever.
Well, let me
it is
just
they
tell
eat.
you, they eat all the deep fried bananas and all the deep fried ice cream. But I will tell you that that was in 2016 is when I did that.
Okay.
So I did have that whole experience that you're talking about, Gary, in
Okay.
that moment. So here's just a commission piece that they wanted, the Iowa State wanted. George Washington Carver was the first African American to go to Iowa State University.
Oh, he was from Iowa.
No, he was from, I don't know if he was Kentucky or somewhere, Nebraska or somewhere, and he was actually stolen in the middle of the night. His mother stole him back. But anyway, that's a long story. But I did this. This was a commission about the mentorship because George Washington Carver and Henry A. Wallace were both at Iowa State at the same time. Henry A. Wallace becomes the vice president of the United States with Roosevelt, this first one.
And Carver becomes this genius agricultural
And Carver is
scientist.
27, 28, 29 years old, and Henry A. Wallace is 6 or 7 years old. And Henry Wallace used to walk around with Carver in the landscape in Iowa, and Carver would teach him about plants.
No?
And Wallace winds up doing this whole thing with the pioneer seed, and takes corn and does this whole amazing stuff. But of course, we know what Carver does too. So Carver was writing a thesis on hybridization of plants. That's what his thesis was on at the time Henry A. Wallace was with him.
Yeah.
So this piece is about the science of Carver's time and the eventual science of now, and a little bit of that. And here's just another big commission. You asked me to bring something about this big commission.
Yeah, because this is hot off the presses, right?
Yeah, this is like 2020. I was working on this giant piece for the business college at Iowa State University. And so this is basically the student experience moving into the community, and then the community welcoming the student, also mentoring the student, and then just the student's idea of entrepreneurship. And so this is just like a series of giant, like I think it's 5 foot by 24 foot and 5 foot by 17 foot, 3 paintings. The 24 is two diptychs a diptych of 12 foot, 5 foot by 12 foot paintings. This is one of the 5 foot by 12 foot paintings. So those portraits are like 36 inches tall. These heads here, these big heads, and this is. So you were asking me about that?
Yeah.
This is what I was working on when
Yeah,
we were
because
talking.
when I was trying to book Rose for a workshop, she kept talking about the fact that she had this crazy portrait commission.
This big, huge commission.
Yeah,
to do.
that
Yeah.
she had to get done. So I definitely had her as. She's such a great match for Gage in terms of. And she's also a great teacher, by the way. I mean, we look for people who are spectacular artists and fabulous in the classroom, and they're very hard to find. So I try, Rose was in my radar for a while, but she had to get this commission done first, for
Big
one
commission
thing.
done. Yeah. And this is just another piece that I did that's large. It's called Life Has No Opposites. And I used the theme of the thistle. And I did the whole, I think some of your, Juliet Aristides from you guys, right?
Yeah.
Juliet Aristides writes about the golden rectangle and the Fibonacci, and this is all like based on the Fibonacci plant. And there's all this math inside this piece. But it's like 28 paintings becomes one painting. So it's like an 8 foot, I don't know if you saw it, does that? Did you see that it does that?
Oh,
like
okay.
And this is how it hangs in the person's home that bought this piece. They kind of commissioned me. They gave me a blank wall to put a painting on. Now we're at my last 2 series that I'm working on. This is my series on optical illusions intermixed with the portrait. So these are, I'm really interested in exploring identity, sort of feeling like we don't really see each other because we have these illusions of who we think they are by these sort of surface identities. And so I was interested in putting people in, mixing them with optical illusions. And that's like another long story. I don't know if you want to hear it, so we'll just keep going. So these are all just paintings that fit into this giant, I made this one giant wall here of all these different types of Americans. being sort of somewhat engaged or interacting with an optical illusion. So I call this In the Face of Illusion. There's a little bit of reaction to 2016, what we had in the presidential thing, and building a wall. And I thought it was interesting to build a wall of all the people that we're told we didn't want here, or, and just sort of embrace them and put them in this big piece. So this is like my most political painting I ever did. The big series is the optical illusion series. So this is one of them. I had that kind of across the aisle. So all the titles actually sort of talk about the optical illusion as well as the painting. And this one is called How Can We See Straight When All We See Are Targets? And what happens with this optical illusion is that circles make those straights look bending.
Curved,
Do you see how they're bending?
Yeah,
They're curved.
famous optical
You probably
illusion.
know these optical illusions, don't you,
Yeah,
Gary? Because you're an
yeah.
art historian.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought it was interesting to put people with them and see what happens. I guess we're looking down because that's where the screen is for us, you guys. So there we go. You can keep moving through. It's like a long narrative on all of these. I can go on, but we'll just...
Yeah, and we're seeing how exploratory Rose is. So in other words, she's not a one-hit wonder.
Right.
She's adventurous. She wants to try new things, quite obviously. Because these are very different from some of the other series that we've seen.
Right. And this is these are all still different parts of the optical illusion series, and it had no harmonizing factor, aside from the fact that I was the one that painted it, and then there were these panels that sort of harmonized the whole thing with these strong colors. So it was kind of chaotic, but it was kind of interesting because I sort of feel like that's how we are as human beings, But anyway, so this will keep going.
Yeah, and they're always grounded in realism, but now
That's
you're
right.
adding all these more abstract elements.
That's
or
right. That's
expressive or geometric elements.
Right. So this one is, we talked about it earlier, this is like I did this in 1989, and I feel like this is like the first one of this next series of paintings, and we're almost done, that I've been working on. I call it the Incognito series, and this is because I'm really interested in having a three-dimensional being engaging with a two-dimensional world, right?
Okay.
And so I'm not sure if they're trying to fit in, or if they're trying to escape from, or they're trying to see themselves. But it's like a slightly sort of around the behind way of talking about identity as well, to me, a little bit, and how we create stories and narrations for ourselves, and how others do it for us as well. So there's a little bit of putting people into these old paintings. So I'm taking these old murals. You've seen them. You probably recognize these pieces, don't you, Gary?
This one I don't.
That's a mine one. Do you know this one from the Ashanti Caves in India?
Once it goes outside of the Western canon, I'm not so good.
Yeah, but
this one I've been to see the original. We're going to talk about this as our first.
And that's our last painting from my little history.
Cool.
If that was,
wonderful.
Did we do it within 20 minutes?
Yeah, we did. Well, almost.
What are we at?
Well, that was the end of part one.
Yeah, end of part
so that
one.
was
Hope
going
that's okay.
through really quick. So we went wide, and now we'll go a little deeper.
Yeah.
I mean, this one, so I went through that whole presentation, and I picked a couple that I thought it would be fun to focus on, starting with this one. And I guess one of the reasons I thought this one would be fun is because, first of all, there's a fabulous story behind it. And secondly, I've been to the church in Ravenna where this mosaic from like the year 568.
Is that when it is? 568?
Yeah, I mean, it's the oldest piece of Western art I've ever seen, and it's in mint condition. I think what's interesting about, it's a whole bunch of interesting things. So this is the Empress Theodora, who was, as you know, is married to Justinian, and she's a piece of work. She's cut in half here, and that's her court. And so Rose has substituted a flesh and blood woman for a member of her court. And if you look at the original, Rose, one of the things that is really worth mentioning, we don't want to, gloss over it in your work, is you are fabulous with color.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you love color.
I love color. And I told my students this week I'm a bit of a colorist, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of, and they're like, what does that mean, Rose? And I'm like, well, I make my decisions with color. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so you know, we were talking before we started about if you go back and look at her work, if somebody's, well, there's a baby who's coming up who's all swathed in white. Her whites are never white. They've got blues and pinks and warms and cools. Anyway, so this mural is way, even though it's very colorful, you've amped up the color.
I have amped up the
Yeah,
color.
you've amped up the color compared to the original. And then what's really interesting to me is how you, her dress, because the Byzantines didn't do dimensions. You know, I mean, they weren't interested in illusionism.
No.
Everything is flat, flat, flat.
Right.
So you've made this wonderful compromise in her dress between it being sort of a mosaic, but it's sort of coming into 3 dimensions.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I don't know. Chuck, do we have a close-up of, I think we have a close-up of the...
Go back to.
we have a close-up of the woman in the court. Anyway, I just think that's so cool, the way she's sort of emerging out of that.
So Gary, here's a question for you. My model, her name's Ariana, right? And she's covered with tattoos. All right?
Oh.
And Chuck and I are having a debate because I want to put them in on her. Right?
Oh, but...
She has a tattoo in the middle of her forehead.
Oh.
She has a tattoo on the side of her head. You say no? You like it like this?
Yeah, no.
Chuck, you're helping Chuck win that argument.
Yeah, the painting's done anyway.
Do you think the painting's done?
Yeah, it's done.
Okay. Yes. Do you think it would look more contemporary, though? Like, look, that's a real question, right, that I'm asking you? Because I'm interested in sort of this contemporary person sort of engaging in this sort of historical thing.
Yeah.
And seeing how do I fit in this, like, long history of peoples, right? Because I sort of think that this was, now Justine, the people that did Theodora never ever met her, right? The mosaic artist never met Theodora, right? And but they did this impression of her. Right? They have this thing and they say that's her, and we now think of that as Theodora. Which,
I see what you mean. Yeah, because that's true. Yeah, they weren't doing her from life. That's
they
for
didn't
sure.
do it from life. They never actually really saw her. Okay.
Yeah.
When I did my research on it, they never really
they
saw
were
her.
Greeks, and they just imported them to do this church, but they were off in Constantinople.
That's right. She never made it there. So I'm just in this series. I'm just kind of interested in sort of seeing like how we would see ourselves in this like long history of people before us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I love the fact that what it does for me is, you know, I mean, they were. You know, I mean, they loved, they lived, they got depressed, they got drunk, you know, they threw up in the toilet just like you and I.
That's right.
And so, you know, here we are, bridging, I mean, 500, the year 568. I mean, how many years ago is that? It's like 1,500 years ago. So yeah, I mean, you're kind of, you're like compressing all the distance between now and then. I think that's totally cool. In this close-up, you can see what I mean, how she's bringing that kind of mosaic effect on her dress. And where the hell did you get those earrings? Whoa.
My model was wearing them. Ariana
Oh my
was
God.
wearing those earrings.
Perfect.
Right? Isn't that amazing?
Are those perfect?
And she actually was posing in a white dress, and I just changed the design and tried to match somewhat the design of the I'm going to call it the Ravenna piece. Is that how you would say it? Of the Ravenna piece. So I'm modifying, I'm changing it just a little bit.
And if Theodora is you know, floating around somewhere as a spirit, she would approve.
She would approve.
She can be part of my court. She looks glamorous enough.
Glamorous enough, right? This was earlier, but this is...
Yeah, so...
What do you want to say about this? I'm curious.
Yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about these more... because, first of all, you're really having fun with the abstract versus the representational element. And, of course, the trompe-l'oeil effect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you probably notice when you do trompe-l'oeil, people get so impressed. They go, oh, my God, it's so amazing. I mean, that's actually much easier than to do all the rest of this stuff.
It is.
But then this one also has things like that big blob of paint underneath pass.
Right.
So
right.
What's this one about in your mind?
I've sort of, I guess I sort of, I could tell you, it's kind of interesting. I sort of feel like these, like we in our life, we have these like dark moments, right? And it's really hard inside of that dark moment, recognizing that it's only this dark moment and there'll be another moment and this will pass, right? It's really funny. This model posed for me from life for this figure. And when she left, I just had a lot of the drips and the abstraction back there. And I didn't have that big dark mass yet, okay?
Yeah.
And she came and she hung out with me for maybe she posed for me for a month in my studio, and we did like 5 or 6 paintings of her posing for me. And then I let that painting sort of sit and cook on the side in my studio for maybe 8 months or a year. And she went on with her life, and we didn't have a conversation, not for any reason, but we just didn't see each other. And then I put this big sort of, I got this idea to go, this too shall pass, and this big sort of dark mass kind of, and sort of bleeding, sort of dripping dark mass in there. And when she saw this painting about a year after that, after I did it, she found it, she started to cry because she said, when I left your studio, I went through this wave of depression, and I couldn't believe that wasn't right after my studio, but not too long. I couldn't believe that you caught this thing inside about my life, right? So it was kind of interesting, but you see she's holding the tape that writes this too shall pass, which is like, in some ways, I'm really interested in the idea that some ways we have the truth or our direction out of the dark period inside of ourselves. And like some part of herself, I call this painting Remembrance of the Future, for the future, or Remembrance for the Future. So it's like some part of her will remember that this will pass, right?
I get you, right, because she put the message on the wall with the tape.
With her own self.
Well,
Do you
very
see
cool.
that? I'm sort of playing with that kind of idea.
Yeah, very cool.
And she posed with that tape in her hand, right?
Oh, okay.
Even though I didn't know I was going to write This Too Shall Pass at the time I did that part.
Wow.
That kind of sits when I'm cooking around on the idea afterwards.
And that's kind of your Lucian Freud moment, right? That blob, because Lucian Freud had this habit of cleaning his palette at the end of a working session, and then taking all the extra paint and just slathering it on the edges of his portraits.
Yeah. It was definitely, it's really thick, and it's a lot of goop and a lot of stuff like that. It was really kind of fun, kind of a mess.
That's
I don't know.
why,
do you feel like it's moving across the canvas? I don't know if you see
Yeah,
it.
sure. There's
You
tons
get
of
that-
it. Oh,
you
yeah,
get
it's
that
kind of like
feeling?
a comet.
That's what I felt like. It was like a dark comet, right?
Yeah.
Passing?
Yeah.
So it works.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this is why digital will never replace painting, ever, ever, ever. Because there's no there. There's no physicality.
Well, there's something about that, and I totally agree with you, because even if you see this painting in person, you have a whole other experience, because you do you experience that materiality of that.
Yeah.
But also the tape and those, you see how the past has those drippings over top of it? It was actually dripped before I put the tape on it.
Oh?
It's like I did not put the drips over top the tape. I painted around it do you see how I did it?
Okay.
So I was finding a way to put it inside of that drip.
Yeah, so some of the letters have the drips right in them.
So right into them.
I see.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting little thing.
Now, I did this, I love the homage to the Adele Bloch-Bauer.
Yes.
Although, in the case of the Klimt, yeah, it's multimedia.
Are you a little sad for me that it's not as good as the Klimt?
But I have no idea what material this one is done in.
This is stained glass,
Wow.
copper, paint, I did gold leaf, real pure gold leaf, copper leaf, and palladium leaf are all in this piece. It's on a panel, and some parts of it stick out from the painting about 1.5 inches, and some parts of it are buried. I carved into the panel and stuck the glass in so it stays on the front surface of the piece. So it has a little dimension to it too.
Right. And
This piece, yeah.
And so, I think that this is a very different project, because what Klimt was playing with, as you are here, right, is the 2D versus 3D thing.
Right, that's right. I'm way into that. I've been way into that for decades. And it is true that you are right to put me in front of Klimt, because I was very inspired by Klimt, especially when I was younger. Super inspired. I loved Gustav Klimt's work from the first time I saw it. So.
Have you ever seen any of the gold?
Oh yeah, I saw that piece you have here from
Yeah.
Life. Yeah, definitely. I've seen entire shows of Klimt in my life.
I got to tell you, Rose, we did an art tour to New York, and it's now in the Noe Gallery on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
At that point, it had just gotten there, and everybody was buzzing because it sold for like $120 million. And one of the people on my tour looked at the painting, and he looked at me. He said, "It was worth it."
Yeah, it's like insanely. It's
Yeah,
great. It's absolutely great, right?
Yeah, and that one you can go see, Vienna.
Yeah.
Now, this is a self-portrait.
Yeah, I was younger. I was cuter then. Sorry. So let me just tell you, I'm dating Chuck. Chuck and I aren't married yet. This is like a year before we get married. And I painted probably like 33 self-portraits before I did this one, because I used to paint myself all the time. And I know you like to do pictures. You do yourself too, Gary, right?
Yeah, oh no, every couple of years, yeah.
Because you know you're cheap, you're free, you're available, and you're always on time, right?
Yeah.
So that's why you paint yourself. And so, but Chuck had seen like a whole bunch of these paintings. And he said to me, "No, listen, you're going to do a self-portrait. Paint yourself looking good for once." Because like you, Gary, I like to make faces and do the self-portrait. The ones that you can't get a model to hold is like what I like to do. But should I tell you about the idea behind this painting?
Yeah, please.
So I was living in New York, in my apartment in New York, and I was really wanted to paint somebody, and I wanted to paint somebody from life. And I didn't have anybody coming into the studio. And I was just like walking around wondering what to paint. And I realized that I should just paint myself wondering what to paint. So I put the sort of blank canvas. You know those Virgin Mary paintings from the old days?
Yeah.
Like where she sits on the throne, like, and they have the archway behind her. You know which
Yeah.
ones I'm talking about. You probably even know the names of them, like Gerard David and those guys, or Hans Memling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know how Mary's always kind of framed by this stuff.
Yeah.
I said frame myself by the blank canvas. Do you see that?
Okay.
And the reason why it's two colors is because I'm painting it from life, and I got the different colors bouncing into my studio from the outdoors light hitting that blank canvas, right? So it's a little greener from the landscape reflecting into it and a little grayer. But anyway, so I learned that should I keep going?
Well, what's the background?
The background is like, what do you call it? Peacock feathers, right? Because peacock feathers is a symbol of watchfulness.
Oh,
Did you ever hear this?
Oh, so you're taking
Peacock.
you're blowing them up.
I'm abstracting them.
Tiny detail of a peacock.
Well, this
feather?
painting is life size. So
Yeah,
this
but
peacock
you're
feathers-
blowing up a detail of a peacock feather,
And-
so it's a wall sized.
So it just sort of rotated it all over the place, sort of thought of it like as the neurons firing in my brain. It just doesn't, I don't know if it makes any
Wow.
sense. Like it's the part of you that has to be watching for the next idea to come. If you look, you can't really see it in this picture, but down there below by my hand in the sketchbook is a bunch of, from the Raphael's, just a second, School of Athens. I took characters from the School of Athens painting, and I have them watching what I'm trying to do.
What? Where?
Yeah, they're like right in, I'm going to point it. They're right in, so look at my sketchbook right in front of my knee.
Okay.
There's like a couple little light spots. They're like heads.
Oh.
That'll be those. But if you see the real painting, back to the whole idea of seeing the real thing from life,
Okay.
you can totally see those figures in there. So it's just like, so I'm sitting there
Anyway,
wondering what to paint.
Gorgeous painting. So this is this amazing dance painting she did. And as soon as I saw it, I immediately flashed on this one.
Right.
And, Rose, we got to do people a favor. I think a lot of people have not heard of Zorn, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And there were three great painterly realists, all big inspirations to Rose.
Zorn, Sargent, and Sorolla.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Zorn did paint people dancing. I don't know if he used photographs. I did not use photographs for mine. Okay, he didn't use photographs for these.
None of those guys did photos.
He's out there painting these, and I think this was called like summer nights. They would they would have these dances in these barns, and I had seen the Zorn show. I went to Sweden to see the Zorn paintings, and I even went to his home and all of that because Zorn and Sorolla became like our meccas, right?
Right.
And Sargent was easy to access here, but I went to see those Zorns, and it's absolutely true that I was inspired to do the dance paintings because of the Zorn. And I think I did 35 of these paintings.
Oh my God.
On a Friday night, they would have these dances, and I would go every Friday night. And I was single, Gary, and men would come up to me and they'd say, you shouldn't be painting, you should be dancing. You need a man, right? So it was very funny. It's like, those kind of things you get only
I
when you're...
loved New England square and line dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you get to have physical contact with a bunch of strangers. It's great exercise. Yeah.
So how I would do it, because these people are dancing by you, right? Now, some part of line dancing, they're like in the rows. Did you do it when they're in the rows?
Yeah.
So this is country line dancing, and they're playing country music, and most of my life I've done everything I can to avoid country music, but when I'm painting it, it became really helpful to me.
And plus, they're telling you what to do, right?
Right.
Yeah, you know, you step to the right.
That's true. They are doing that.
Do-si-do, take your partner.
But the people in that movement that you're seeing in that painting, they're actually dancing around this big circle in the gym, right? And I would watch that couple as they would move around the space and wait for them to come back, swing back by me to get my next question. But I'd be looking at all the other hips at like what height was the hip at this point? Where was that reflection compared to the foot? All of those kinds of things. I'm making those choices by everybody else that passes. But when they would come, I would like be ready and make those decisions on top of that.
This is an artist who's committed to working from life.
That's right. Especially when I was younger. It was like,
we don't make it easier for ourselves if we don't use photos.
That's right.
I mean, I just assumed this one was done from a photo. I mean, that
Not.
lighting is so spectacular. It looks like you had a professional setup there.
Totally done from life. And that's where the light is hitting the hill back behind him and the grass is being all lit up. No. George would go out and take a couple nips in between breaks. Yeah, the further along we went every day, the drunker he got, which was kind of fun, right? So no, this is totally done from life. All of it.
Yeah, I mean,
But you know what, Gary? The thing is, this is a large painting, once again being reduced. So it becomes more photographic. When you see this, When you see it large,
it's life size. He's
life size. Absolutely life size, right?
The cows are not life size.
Yeah.
The guy is life size.
If you think I'm from a photograph, would I have those mistakes that I have in those cows in the background?
No,
right?
I don't.
There's a few drawing errors in there.
We don't see the mistakes.
That's
the
good.
artists are always so hard.
I'll point them out.
They're harder on their own work. No, I think this is one of my favorite paintings of yours. I think it's so strong. And you know, that gorgeous landscape and his, you know, his kind of almost heroic stature, you know, I mean,
just holding that sort of rake.
He's almost like a biblical figure. You know, you've given him so much dignity, Rose.
Well, yeah.
I mean, look, he's sitting in the barn surrounded by, you know, but I don't know, cow poop.
Right.
And you know, he looks like a creature. He looks like a character from Greek mythology.
You know what? He was
like Thor.
He was thrilled to be painted like this.
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
Totally. And you know, Gary, you're not wrong about me looking for the dignity in person. One of the things that the Portrait Maquoketa project taught me is that people ache to be seen in that way. And so I have no problem looking for the dignity in people. I kind of find that it's like the least I can do to give to another person. And I find really interesting about the portrait process, this slow art form where we look at each other and I look at you and you look at me. And let's say in this case, I'm painting you and you're looking at me. It's like a total opportunity for me to see you as a human being sitting across from me. And at the same time, I realize that you're also, as the sitter, looking at me in the same way. And so I just find that painting in that moment and direct painting and looking at each other is just like the canvas, the painting is only a representation of that possible experience that I'm really interested in having.
Was this part of that? The baby was?
Portrait Maquoketa.
Wow.
Yeah, this is like an 8-day-old baby. And every time I extra clicked my brushes, like sometimes you hold a couple of brushes and you click.
He would squirm.
He would squirm a little bit even though he was sleeping. You know, I would like, shh.
Oh,
and we
man.
we actually have it on video while the baby is sitting there. Chuck came in and photographed while the parents are watching me do their brand new baby and getting that painting. He is the parents in the audience watching the painting happen. And you see me click and I say, oops, sorry, while I'm painting a baby from life.
And this is an example of those gorgeous pastel tones that make your whites so alive, you know, the warmth and the cools and the pinks and
it's the color, the color of light falling on white, right?
Yeah.
It'll happen.
Hardest damn thing to paint.
Really?
Yeah, and you just nailed it. I mean, that makes that so beautiful. And I love this sequence, although you kept the sky the same.
Well, this is so in order for me to paint that large landscape, I went out on location for 5 weeks, and I was trying to paint this huge, long scene as a study to figure out the color of the sunlight falling on that hill. And in order for me to do it, I realized I had to draw it all up because I couldn't make the proportion decisions of my town from the hillside while I was painting, the sunlight only passing through it for a little bit. So I went out and I spent days drawing it all up in pencil. And then
Oh, that's what this is?
I drew the whole scene up in pencil, and I just did like one section for every day, and I broke that down into like 7 sections. And then I put plexiglass or like a Duralar over top of it. So this is 18 by 72 or something, or 18 by 80 inches long. And I just took plexiglass and I just painted different skies to see what sky I thought would work with the big composition.
Okay.
So these are just my studies for the large painting.
Okay.
The big one that
And there you are on location.
They were on location. All my studies were on location, and there I am out, on location, just working. This is one of the final panels, and I'm just trying to confirm what those clouds are doing, just kind of trying to confirm that variation of the sky from the pink, from the horizon line upward, what those colors really look like.
And what you don't see is the wind and the bugs and the
Oh
dogs.
yeah, the dogs. There was definitely a dog right behind me. Definitely.
Yeah, all the, and then, here it is hung. So what we were saying about anamorphosis is this illusion that something that doesn't converge visually except for one privileged location, which is that chair, right?
That's chair.
And then from the chair, you would see this,
That's
correct?
right. You would see that piece. And in that chair, what we did with this piece, when I did Portrait Maquoketa, I realized this conversation I was having with each person was kind of really important. So I made myself available for 6 weekends, and Maquoketans came in and talked to me on audio recording. And I asked them questions, sort of like StoryCorps.
Oh.
And I recorded 51 people over like 15 hours talking to me. And when you sit in the chair and when you sit in this bench, you can hear, on the bench side, you can hear their conversations. My brother's a composer, and he took the conversation and turned the 15 hours into a 27 musical piece on one side. And when you sit in the chair, you hear a true composition that my brother wrote for what it felt like to be on the hill looking at the landscape with my community in the foreground. Wow. And then he has some of the voices kind of bleeding in through. So there's a sound aspect to this piece too that the museum also got when they bought this piece. So you sit in the chair and you hear one aspect that sort of biases toward the landscape, and on the bench you hear the voices aspect, if that makes sense.
How many towns of 6,000 people have the luck of having somebody like Rose to immortalize them and celebrate them?
You know, in our book, Chuck wrote that this project he felt like was really beneficial to the community. We have a little book that we put on Portrait Project, and Chuck wrote, I think that if you're an artist, you should do this for your town too. And in the time that we've done this project, we've had 38 artists contact us to tell me that they're doing something like this for their community too. Wow. So we've had 38 people, at least that have contacted me specifically, said they heard about my project, or they saw my project at the Smithsonian, or they saw it here, or they saw my book, and they're trying to do it too.
Wow,
yeah.
Good for you.
Is that nuts?
And then do the people end up with a print?
So everybody who posed got a giclée print that Chuck and I made for them, specifically for them.
Okay.
And that was my way to thank you for them for posing.
Right.
You know?
Plus, they can't complain like a commissioned portrait, right? Because if it's a commissioned portrait, oh, my mouth isn't like that. Oh, you maybe look too old.
It was a one and a done, Gary. If it didn't work, it didn't work, right?
Yeah. Plus, they can't complain in the same way because they're not paying for it.
But here's what happened with me: when I didn't know that people would be very interested in the final project. I didn't even think about that when I got the idea. But people would walk in and they'd say, "Hey, Rose, I'm going to use this for my obituary." So all of a sudden I realized how they looked in the painting might matter to them. It didn't even occur to me, because I was really interested in trying to paint them as an artist would see them, and whatever first impression they had when they walked into the space, I would try to nail that first impression. And then when they said that, I was like, it made my job a little bit, tiny bit tougher, you know?
Well, plus Rose also has to have, any artist who can do this from life also has to have some degree of photographic memory, because people are squirming around
The whole
and
time.
they're moving and they're looking to one side or another, and you've got to, you make them look like they were sitting that still, and in many cases they weren't.
Yeah, there's one guy that sang to me the entire time, and I don't know if his painting shows up. Did you wind up putting that in there, Chuck? It doesn't show up, but you'll see that in his painting, I did these stripes in the background for the movement of his head as he was singing, as a way to kind of find myself sort of in there.
And you're also not flattering people.
No,
as this gentleman demonstrates.
This is my neighbor, and he and I had quite a few those type of neighbor arguments.
Okay.
Right? When we were...
Oh, typical neighbor argument.
Like he's like put his air conditioners on my property, right? And all of that kind of stuff. So we had these this whole like 3 or 4 years of having some sort of like property line issues. Not my encroaching on him, but him encroaching on my property.
Yeah.
And so when he came and posed for this portrait, we totally healed that entire argument.
Man.
It was fabulous.
I love it. I
But
love it.
It was great. And Jack, he's like his Jack Rosenberg. And he's just actually a fabulously strong-willed but wonderfully loving person underneath all of this sort of like, what do you call it? Don't mess with me exterior. So it was
And now
pretty.
he will live on through the ages.
He does,
lucky
right?
guy.
He's really proud of this painting. He's really happy that he did it. And it was a dynamite thing, because having him sit across from me, once again, this whole idea of this experience where you're with somebody else, having him sit across from me, and my aim to see him and his aim, that conversation has to happen. So we kind of healed that little bit of rift, and we've been great friends ever since.
All right. Well, on that super positive note,
Is that okay? Are we
of
done?
art as a way to bridge between people and build community, and also express, I think of artists with a super big heart. I think it's a wonderful way to end this portion of our evening. Rose, this has been super inspiring, interesting, fascinating, etc. So now we will turn it over to anybody who is out there in cyberspace who wants to submit a question, and I am going to pull them up on my iPad as they come in. I have not, Town Hall went through this big renovation, and this is only my second time in this new performance space, but it's a wonderful place to do a conversation like this. And so they also have this electronic Q&A interface for anybody who wants to submit a question, either in the audience or people who are listening to this online. Rose, what's your latest project?
The Incognito series, the one that with the mosaic was the last painting I was doing when I left town. Right, so that's kind of what I'm working on personally.
Okay.
And I'm also doing a lot of commissions right now, so.
And how do you feel about portrait commissions? Because it's a very different dynamic from, when you invite somebody, as in the portrait of Maquoketa. Do you like portrait commissions? Are they not as comfortable? Because
I like portrait commissions.
Yeah.
So Gary, I don't know if you're getting a picture of me, but I'm really interested in people.
Yeah.
So when I'm painting,
no, we got that. Yeah.
when I'm painting somebody for a portrait commission, it is like a whole other discovery of a life. And a lot of times, when I'm painting somebody, I've been asked to paint. I'm usually asked to paint somebody who's done some sort of interesting, wonderful things for the world.
Okay.
And that opportunity of sitting across from them is there. Like, I learn about a world that I don't know anything about.
Yeah.
I mean, I get changed. I feel like I get slightly changed by every person I get to engage with in this way. And so I try to make a painting like a portrait commission. Every painting, I try to make it to be a painting that I would want to paint. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I take a portrait commission. It doesn't matter to me. I try to make it a painting I want to paint, you know? Oh, somebody has that apple pie painting from my early days?
Okay, so somebody says, in our dining room in Seattle, I have Rose's apple pie from her days at the palette and chisel. All right, tell us what's that about?
It's so funny. So when we were younger at the Palette and Chisel, so Nancy Guzik, Scotty Burdick, we were sort of, Richard Schmid somewhat mentored us at the Palette and Chisel. So it was like, it's like a type of, now it's become more of a formal school, but at the time we had, it was sort of like an open studio, a public space. It was an old building that you could just go to and paint models. Like as a group, everybody would hire a model and you would paint them. But it was a little bit more organized than that. It was like there's an Art Students League in Denver. You've seen that? You ever been there?
Yeah, I've been there.
It's a little like the Art Students League in Denver. It's a little like where it was just basically a whole building made for representational artists to come and paint live models.
And where is it?
In Chicago.
In Chicago,
And
okay.
that's where I met Richard Schmid painting there. And he was just another guy in the room painting, and we were just standing behind him. And Nancy Guzik, who eventually marries him, was the first one brave enough to ask him a question. This great painter. And so he started helping Nancy get better. And then I asked him a question, and Scotty asked him a question. We just sort of learned informally from him in the room. And so I did this painting. So this is all to say, we always used to paint still lifes because we learned you could paint still lifes any time of the day or night. And we set up this, we were always trying to find different types of things that you would paint for a still life, not just like the normal pretty flower ones. And so I don't know where I was at my grandma's or somebody, and they were making apple pie, and they had the flower on the table and all that, and I had the roller and stuff. So I just kind of set that scene up and painted like the apple pie process with all the objects around it, and I did it. My dad absolutely loved this painting when I was younger because it reminded him so much of his mom, right? It's like, oh, I love the apple pie. For years, my dad would say, that painting, so good job, Carrie Fowler. You have a painting my dad really loves. So it's like from those early still life periods. I painted popcorn, card games with popcorn, you name it, I painted anything.
And Rose, a couple blocks from here is a condo building where a woman named Lorraine,
Lenora.
Lenore Hanauer.
Yeah.
Lives a couple blocks from here.
She owns a few of my pieces.
Yeah, so tell us about that Hanauer connection, because that's kind of fascinating.
Her family, I think, owned this Pacific Coast Feathers. It was a factory that people in my town worked at. In fact, a lot of people were employed in my town at her factory. And they were really good communitarians. Like, they were really good about how they engaged with the community as a business coming into our town. And I guess she just came to the gallery. You know her? You met her?
No, my son knew her because he was a doorman at her building.
And do you know that she owns a couple of my pieces?
Yeah.
Are they hanging in her house or her son's house? I don't know where they are.
I don't either, but it's just interesting that this super prominent local family from Seattle had this factory
in Iowa, in my little town in Maquoketa.
Yeah.
And you know that first painting I did of the kids in the alley singing?
Yeah.
The one kid's
in Chicago.
In Chicago. They own that painting.
Oh, okay.
And they also own the painting of the woman in the red with the outside with the in the landscape, which she's kind of draped in sort of a red velvet thing.
Okay.
And it was in one of the early years. She went through our gallery in the early years, and she bought 2 of those pieces.
And she spent time in Maquoketa.
Yeah. Like. So they fixed up one of these old houses on one of our nicer streets in the old days. They brought this house back and made it beautiful and painted it and kept all the trees and everything. She's like a really wonderful person to own a property, and she would come and stay there. Sometimes when they came to visit the factories, or their executives would stay in this house when they would come to our town. And so she just happened to go through the gallery, and she bought a few paintings, and they wound up in Seattle. That is so funny. Chuck put those in the show because he was wondering if people from Seattle might see them. So I only knew that they bought them in Seattle, and they took them out to Seattle. I didn't ever know what happened since. This is probably 22 years ago.
Yeah, and your worldviews are very compatible because obviously they're super community-minded and philanthropic, and her son Nick is involved in all these local causes.
That's what we've learned since, right? Yeah. Chuck figured that out, right? I said, I know we sold some paintings to some people who ran the feather company in Seattle. And he figured out that it was the Hanovers. Because my mom, Hanovers, or what, my mom didn't remember who, except she remembered it was Lenora. That I remember my mom kind of being on a first name basis with her.
Okay, so Rose, if we're driving through Iowa by chance, and Chuck they drove here from Iowa.
Yeah.
And they're driving back on Saturday if they open the passes. And Chuck was saying it's like, I don't know, 34 hours or something like that. If we happen to be driving through Ottawa and we pull up in front of the old city hall that you own and that's your studio, what would we see if we walked into the ground floor?
You'd see a gallery.
A gallery, and what's in the gallery?
Well, you would see some of the optical illusion pieces.
Okay.
You'd see some of the incognito pieces. There's a lot more work that you have not seen that you would see in there. You might see some early sort of allegorical pieces of different series that we haven't sold. If you come to my gallery, you can see work from 25 years ago to present. So you get you can sort of see a whole history. You can see like at least 3 self-portraits from like a portrait I did when I was 30 and a portrait I did, that self-portrait there that you have. I mean, we sold that piece, but we got it willed back to us.
Oh, that self-portrait
the
with
one
the
with the
peacock
blue,
feathers.
with the peacock feathers.
Yeah, so you're going to get back.
We got it back. Our collector willed it back to Chuck, so
Good,
Chuck owns it.
good,
So you can
good.
see that hanging in our gallery. You can see a few more. There's like one wall of self-portraits, and then there's just tons of different. You can see that stained glass piece.
Okay.
That with the Klimtis one, because that was also. Willed back to Chuck, or anyway. So and you can see Chuck's work as well. You can see both of our work.
Okay.
So because we sort of show the two of us, and we also have a potter friend of mine in New York that you can see in our gallery.
Okay.
So,
well, we'll try to return the favor. I mean, Rose came all the way out here to teach at Gage and do this talk tonight. The least we can do is somebody who's listening to this, maybe myself and my wife, will stop by your gallery in Maquoketa.
There you go. So it's 28 hours actual, but it takes 34 if you use the restroom.
Okay. Well, so thank you very much, Town Hall. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Rose Frantzen. Thank you, Chuck. And thanks to Gage and Town Hall, our sponsors, for making this evening happen. Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yay.